let's talk today about how to blend with watercolor pencils, specifically how to get some really lovely smooth gradients of color. Now, this is actually something I do in every single drawing that I create. Because I focus on drawing realistically, you don't tend to find really abrupt edges to color. You want all of the colors to blend together. So rather than creating a color swatch to demonstrate blending, I want to show you today by drawing a picture. The goal hopefully is that you'll see how to apply these blending techniques to actual drawings. I thought it'd be fun today to show you by drawing this vibrant drink. Now, before we actually look at putting pencil down on the paper, I think it would help to explain probably the main and most core fundamental technique to any watercolor pencil drawing, and that is layering. So rather than putting down a whole load of colors on the paper and then activating with water and then that's the end, I find you get a much richer color if you build up the pencil in layers. So I always like working in the same way, building up the lighter colors and then activating with the water, then the midtones activating with the water, and then the darkest colors and then activating. And then I can use the pencil dry to smooth out any final areas. So let's go through this with the drawing, show how to build up and create a smooth gradient by the end with this drink drawing. Now, before we get started, if you want to draw this with me in a lot more detail, it is available on my Patreon. I have loads of tutorials in a variety of different subject matters, and I have not only watercolor pencils but also colored pencils and graphite pencils. For every tutorial I include really in-depth instructions, all of the real-time footage, details of all of the colors I'll be using, sketch outlines and the reference photo. I have some shorter, faster drawings and some much longer drawings, but they do have a bit more wow factor. Check out the link in the description. So let's start off by building up these layers of color. So I want to put down the lightest color that I can see in each area of this drawing. So starting off with the white foam on the top of the drink, the lightest color that I would say I can see here is a very light gray. Although the foam looks white, when I really look, it isn't actually white. And I can also do the same around the bottom of the glass. All around here, the lightest color I would say is this warm gray. Then I can look for the lightest color in the next area. So I want to add in a purple on the straw up here, and then I can add in pink on the bulk of the drink area. Now, the most important thing that I want to be doing whilst filling in these lightest colors is to be pressing really nice and lightly. I don't want to be pressing really hard with the pencil. It's not going to end up creating a smooth blend when I activate this with the water. So to help me press lightly, I'm holding the pencil quite far back. I'm not holding it really close to the tip, and that literally stops me from being able to press too hard. I also find it helps to have a nice and sharp pencil. The pencil just goes down in a much smoother and more consistent way. And I'm also trying to make this as smooth as possible by working in some large kind of oval motions rather than just scribbling back and forth. And all of these things combined are going to help create a really nice smooth base that we're going to be able to build all of our blending on top of. Essentially, what I want to do at this point is just put something down on the paper. And as I say, we're only focusing on those lightest areas. So once I've got some color in every area on the drink, what I now want to do is activate this with the water. And I find it helps to work one color at a time. At this point, I don't want to be muddying the color. I don't want to be pushing the pink color into the gray section, for example. So I'm going over all of the gray areas to begin with, and you'll see I'm still kind of working with circular motions with the paintbrush to again try and make this as smooth as possible. I'm also not using loads of water. I'm using a little bit, but it's better to use too little than too much. So you'll see I'm going to go over the whole of the pink area with those circular motions with the paintbrush, it's going to look a little bit patchy at this point, but that's okay. Once we've built all of these colors on top of each other, that is what's going to create a smooth and even blend. So once I've gone over this whole area, I want to wait for the paper to completely dry. So I want to leave it for at least half an hour before moving on to the mid-tones. So I want to think about the next darkest colors. And at this point, I can start thinking about the main shapes I can see within the drink. So for example, on the drink itself, there are a lot of the kind of lines going up the glass. I want to map those in, starting off with a quite vibrant red. So just a slightly darker version of that first pink. And you'll see that I am still pressing lightly. I still don't want to be pressing really firmly with the pencil. I'm going over where the lines are, for example, and then I want to fade out generally to the left by just still building up a small amount of pencil to that left-hand side. You'll see that some areas are darker than others with the pencil. Rather than pressing harder to build up these darker areas, I am literally going over the area more times to add more of the pencil to make a darker color. So I can go over this whole area on the right-hand side. This area around here actually will need to be very dark, but so that we're not creating a really abrupt blend, I'm just building up a little bit of the pencil in this area as well, rather than leaving it that very light pink. I want to be putting this color essentially anywhere where I can see this color or darker. I can then build up any other colors I can see within here. So you can see I'm adding in a kind of orangey pink now, just lightly going over that same area and fading out as we get towards the lighter areas. And then I can move on to a darker kind of reddish brown. This is the burnt sienna to fill in the kind of darker mid-tones. I want to go along here where there's the shadow from the straw and add a little bit of the pencil down the bottom. There's quite a deep shadow down here. So you can see from just building up some of the pencil in these light layers, we've already got a reasonable blend, but I once again want to be activating this with the water. Always remember that any pencil you put down at this point will get much darker and much richer when activating with the water. I'm just going to add a really little bit of a bright red. And then this time I want to be really thinking about how I'm activating with the water. So I want to be activating from the lighter colors towards the darker colors. So you'll see I'm going down that left-hand side and then I'm going down the darker area to create a nice gradient between these two areas. If I blend from the darker areas to the lighter areas, I'm just going to push all of that pigment into those lighter patches and I'll end up making the whole thing very muddy. It won't really have the nice gradient, the nice blend that I'm going for. Now, I do think it's worth saying that when this has been activated with the water, it is going to look a bit patchy. It's not going to look perfectly smooth at this point. That's okay. My main focus right now is to try and keep the lights and darks pretty accurate to the reference photo, but I also want to be just creating these really good and rich base layers that I will be able to build up and tweak later on. And very quickly, I've got my lightest colors and my mid-tones mapped in. Let's do the same once it's dried for the darkest colors. So filling in the particularly dark patch around here, I'm filling in a very dark brown. I'm actually not going to use the black at this point because I find when I put the black down and then activate it with water, it looks very, very harsh. Generally speaking, if I'm going to use black, I will do it with the dry pencil only. I won't activate with the water. And there's never a huge amount of the darkest colors that I need to add, certainly not in comparison to the lightest and mid-tones. I'm only adding in at this point both a very dark brown and this dark red here in any areas that I think need that little extra richness. So going over the top of all of the brown as well to create a more dark reddish brown. And then I can once again activate with the water, making sure I am again activating from the lighter colors towards the dark colors. So you can see I'm going from the light edge here and then up to those darker colors, and it creates a nicer gradient. I can't stress enough, I don't expect it to look anywhere close to perfect at this point, but we do have some sort of kind of basis for blending. And certainly the next step is going to be so much easier. So this is where the whole drawing is going to come together. Now that I've activated with the water, this is what I'm working with. And it looks quite patchy at this point. So I want to build up, really on the most part, those same colors, smoothing everything out and blending all of these colors together. But this is going to go so much faster than it would if we hadn't activated with the water. So you can see I'm starting off by smoothing out these lighter areas, going over any area that I think is looking too light or maybe too patchy. Now, in terms of how I'm doing this, it's very much the same as what I did when we're putting down those base layers before we activated with the water. I want to be pressing really nice and lightly. I want to be working in circular motions, and I want to be working with a nice and sharp pencil. These are all going to be key. And then I am literally going to continually layer these colors on top of each other. So once I'm happy with the very lightest areas, I'm happy that the lightest colors aren't looking as patchy, I can work my way down through the colors. So moving through to the slightly darker pinky red that I added in before, going lightly over all of these patches where the lighter and darker colors are blending together. So you can really see how lightly I'm pressing here. And it's just generally lightly building up a nice gradient. And we want to gradually work towards those darker colors. Now I am going to add little bits of other colors in here, any color that I can see a hint of in the drawing. So for example, there's quite a lot of purple around the top where you can see the straw going through the top of the drink. So I'm going to use some of that same purple that I used in the base layers, just still very lightly, before moving on to, again, that darker reddish brown. Now this burnt sienna is particularly a color that I think looks so different when it's been activated with the water versus when it's just left dry. But I'm still going to use it in the same way, working in these circular motions, pressing nice and lightly. And I want to be constantly thinking about the most obvious difference between my drawing and the reference photo, and on how I can make all of these gradients look a bit more realistic. So I'm particularly noticing this darker patch is not looking dark enough, so I can go back to that dark brown that I used before. And then I think that's looking a little bit harsh next to some of the lighter areas. So I can use this quite bright red to kind of smooth out and blend between the lighter and darker areas, but still going through in that exact same way. At no point am I going to be pressing firmly. I'm always going to want to press lightly here. Then I'm at this point actually going to use some black. I think, as I mentioned, I don't tend to use it when I then want to activate with the water, but at this point we're leaving the pencil dry, and I think these areas here just aren't looking dark enough. But then that's looking a little bit harsh, so I can go over that with the brown pencil. And by literally going over these areas over and over again, I can bit by bit create a nice and smooth blend of colors. And that is essentially how I go about blending on all of my drawings, building up the layers, starting with the lightest colors, activating with water, then the midtones and the darker, activating with water in between. And then I can use those same colors with really light circular motions to build up the color a little bit further and just lightly smooth everything out. Now again, if you want to go through this in a lot more detail, it is available on my Patreon. And if you'd like to look at some of my other techniques I use with watercolor pencils, check out this video here. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.